Hello, hello. Welcome to the January Southern Fried DNN meetup. It's great to see everybody. If you're joining us live, thank you. It's good to see your faces and your pictures and everything that's showing up in the Zoom. If you're joining us after the fact, thanks for checking out the YouTube channel and our southernfrieddnn.com, where all of the kind of recaps are posted out there after the fact. So today we've got a pretty exciting pleasure to have Sebastian Leupold join us from all the way over in Germany. And he's going to be talking a little bit about internationalization within DNN today. And then I'm kind of filling in a slot that we had, and I'm going to be touching a little bit on web components and see if we can show some magic in that and show how kind of Ionic can be used inside of DNN modules. So that'll be really, really fun and interesting. Let me get my screen shared here, and we'll jump into just a few announcements after we thank our sponsors. As always, hopefully I'm sharing the right screen. Are you seeing the meetup screen? Okay.
Yes, you're good.
Good deal. Thank you to managed.com, who proudly supports our meetup and hosts the Southern Fried DNN website. Again, that's southernfrieddnn.com, and I probably should have had that one up here. Let's see, let's put this one in here. And it's pretty much a blog site, so you can go out here and see the recaps, as I was mentioning earlier, of previous meetups that we have up there. Ryan does a good job of putting those in there, putting some notes in there, as well as embedding the playbacks from our YouTube channel. So thanks again to manage.com for doing that. And thank you to Mandeeps for sponsoring a few modules that we use on the site.
The skin and the blog module. Yeah,
that's right. Yes, I keep forgetting about the skin. Yeah, it's the Porto skin, I believe.
Yep.
And the live
Porto
blog on here. So thanks so much for supporting the efforts here. If you are interested in sponsoring and helping out in any shape, form, or fashion, just let us know, and then we'll try to help to spend that money or use those licenses, right? So let's see, community announcements. I don't have anything necessarily to highlight from the community site, but just to remind everyone of dnncommunity.org out here. And a lot of times you can go out here and see some great new blogs that are being posted, as well as discussions on the forums and quite a bit of other resources that you may find helpful out here. So be sure to stay tuned and watch that. You'll see on the banners here that we've got a few things. Oh, that one needs to be updated.
I was saying.
Yeah, we need to do that. As a matter of fact, I might do that while Sebastian is presenting there. I'll still listen to you though, Sebastian. I promise.
Multitasking.
Ryan, why don't you talk a little bit about DNN Summit, which is coming up February the 9th through the 10th. So take it away on that.
By the time we reach the next Southern Fried DNN user group meeting, we will have already been through DNN Summit 2022. The date on that is, I believe it's a Wednesday and a Thursday. That is February the 9th and the 10th. And it is or was still planned as a hybrid conference. So there were in-person components and virtual online components. The system that's being used is the same one that we enjoyed last year, the Hop-In platform, which made it very successful and easy for you to both listen to and participate with speaker sessions. The in-person components, due to COVID's continued uptick and specifically with the Omicron variant, we've decided that the in-person events, the in-person social events are canceled. If you do find that you've already purchased tickets and hotel and you're still planning to head out there, then fear not. Fearless Will Stroll will be in the area, and if you flag him down, he might buy you drinks and hang out with you for a bit. I know that myself, I'm a huge proponent of being in person and having these social events. I thoroughly enjoy them. But I went ahead and also canceled my plans or trips to bring my company in. So just from one reason or another, for health reasons, or even just simple transportation and lodging and logistics, while you know that 30% of every business and organization is out right now having problems with staffing and keeping everything going. So it just seemed like a good time for us to decide that the in-person events were postponed. However, the online event, 2-day event, still happens. There's still social opportunities for meet and greet and connections and networking online, as well as, of course, our sessions. We've got 32 sessions planned, and if David, you'll stop off on the sessions page, I'll point out a couple of different things for each one of the different categories. Because right now is the time when we're driving and encouraging everyone to sign up. At the moment, you know, the event will happen if you don't join us. But if you join us, you can participate. And if you join us, you can learn a lot about these different things. So the event will still occur if you are not there, but I will miss you. So please come. Now is the time to sign up for DNN Summit and get your hop-in account logged into so that you're ready to go. Just a heads up on some of the different sessions that are available here. As always, there are tracks, different topic sides to go into. There's design, marketing, intro to DNN, so kind of like a level 1 DNN type thing, versus development versus development slash security slash upgrades, which is a little bit more in-depth type of things. And this year we also have a special track set aside for each of the major sponsors of the event so that they also have their own information. And even though sponsor sessions are not, you know, just sales sessions for their services, although certainly you should check out the services offered by each one of our primary sponsors, because they are the leaders in the DNN community. They're there for a reason. They're promoting themselves and helping support the DNN event, but they're also sharing with you their hard-won knowledge and information. So there's a lot to benefit from if you stop into any of those sponsor-related track sessions that are being given by folks like, you know, David Poindexter from Envisionative and Cassidy Peterson from 10 Pound Gorilla and Mitch Sellers and Will Stroll. It's going to be a fantastic track to pick up some of those sessions on. But if you'll kind of go back to the first in the list, we'll jump off onto design. There are a number of good sessions. Actually, all the sessions are good. I should start by saying that caveat. All the sessions are good, but a couple that caught my eye that made me think, I've been working with DNN for 10 years and know all of these different things. I'm interested in jumping into some of these because it's interesting to see other people's take and their directions on things. Designing for accessibility and ADA compliance and things to keep in mind when you're focusing on ADA. There are a couple of different levels of that type of topic that you're going to find through the conference. There's ones here on the design side, and then Cassidy does some on the intro and the development side as well. There are also items in here about design related focus for Tailwind CSS and going in depth for an hour with Aaron Lopez. You know, he joined us recently to do some of the same, but we're going to get even more details and information. But then we also have some things around design and UX, and we see those from 10 Pound Gorilla folks. So there's some interesting and exciting things to see in the design category. If you then head into the intro to DNN category, marketing category. The marketing category, we have you know, a couple things like Google Analytics 4. This one from Mark Saunders caught my eye because a few years ago, I gave a talk about Google Analytics and Google page speed and the way that things were being calculated and a few things from Google's perspective. And it's really interesting to see the updates and the things that are happening. And so Google Analytics version 4 is what he's talking about here. And that caught my eye because I'm not up to speed on that yet. I'd like to sit in and get a tour of what I need to pay attention to and understand the difference of how those things are changing. Scrolling down, there's another one a little further down that I was thinking of. I mean, obviously, okay, now there's Cassidy. So then go into the DNN introduction. So that's level 1 DNN. Cassidy has a couple of different ones that are in different places, but there's one here in the intro to DNN that I believe is more about ADA as well. There are items here for how to clean up your site. I'll mention that if you want to just have some fun and egg on the other contestants, you can come join us for DNN Jeopardy. We'll be doing a DNN Jeopardy session. But then we also have things like Chris Hammond pointing out that when he takes a clean, brand new DNN install and starts working on it, he pitches here the different things to do with a clean install to further set it up and lock it down. So I enjoy those perspectives from different people on how they do things. And you'll find that in all of these categories. But now when you move over to the development category, we've got a few different things here. You will find items that are talking about some of our different versions of DNN instances. So you've got Vanjero, you've got Plant an App, talking about different ways to take those tools and make even more out of them. Also examples of how those things are being used in the environments they work inside of. All of it's still based on and on top of DNN, but getting some of these extra perspectives and seeing what's out there is very interesting. This is the one where Cassidy talks about demystifying ADA compliance and finding the right ADA solution, because there are several different approaches. I thought that's always a good thing to get into and watch for, regardless of the industries and types of websites that you work within. There are other development items that are in here that are worth paying attention to. I always focus on the front end. So we've got headacheless CSS and some of these different tracks to take a look at. So security is also in this area, and Mitch Sellers has one here for managing security within DNN and modern things you're fighting against. That is important. There's also another one with Mandeep giving another security related focus about tools that can be used to help shield DNN sites. So these are not things about DNN and the lockdown of DNN, but they are tools to use to detect intrusion, to help protect against it, to quarantine things once you found them. So there are a few really good sessions related to security here in this area as well. I think we've covered most of the bases and the things that I saw that jumped out. Let's put it out to the group. For instance, Daniel's here and Daniel's on screen with modern module development. Daniel, would you like to give a plug and kind of talk about what you got ahead in that?
Yeah, so that's going to be a tips and tricks and things I've seen done wrong and how to do it better for Web API, which will cover security, performance, scalability, and the fourth item I forgot. And web components, how to wrap up look and feel and behavior all in one little small thing that can be reused everywhere, which is super useful for reusability.
Reusing.
Yeah, that's going to be the main concept there.
David, how about yours on the page? The building a mobile app with DNN as the backend.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one where I'll take a real life example of where a mobile app has been built with DNN serving the data in the back end through the mobile app and so forth. So be kind of an introductory type presentation really on kind of how to go about doing that and kind of connecting all the dots.
I know it's been a few years back, but I think of you and DNN as the back end for mobile things when I think about that Davidson project where there were screens all over the town and they was using DNN as the back end for something else.
Oh yeah, the digital
not exactly
finding. Yeah, it was like
it's exactly it's digital. It's not mobile exactly, but still.
It was very interesting.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so that's it. The main point is DNN Summit plans are wrapping up now. All of the session speakers are putting together their last details on their sessions. And if you want to learn what the schedule is, you can come to the website to see the individual sessions and the details, to follow your favorite speakers. And also, like David's doing now, just take a look at the timeline of events so that you can plan out each hour of the day when you're going to want to jump over from one session to another and where you're going to be going. So sign up if you haven't already. You'll see other sponsors such as Manage.com and DNN for Less, and even sponsor and organizations such as Mandeep and Bogdan and DNN Sharp. They're all promoting to their client base right now the fact that DNN Summit signups are going on, and DNN Summit is next week, next month. So if you see those emails, click links on them, let people know that you're coming. And if you haven't signed up already, get signed up.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank
I'll
you.
also mention that DNN Connect is well underway in planning their 2022 event. It'll be in June the 30th through July the 3rd, and it's going to actually be an in-person event, you know, barring no restrictions that come down, you know, based on the COVID situation right now. But it'll be in Millau, France. And I think they just sent out a communication today just asking for people to go ahead and register if they have intentions to come, you know, barring no issues with restrictions and so forth, to go ahead and commit. Because I think the facility, which they've used in the past for one of the DNN Connect, well, actually, maybe two of the events. Were at this facility. I can't remember if it was one or two. Anyways,
I think one at least, yeah.
yeah. There's an opportunity which ideally they would have the whole facility to themselves, and that requires a certain number of attendees. So I think they have until the end of the month to commit to that. Otherwise, it'll be more of an open kind of event, not exclusive to them. But no worries either way. But if you do plan on being there, if you're especially if you're in Europe and have greater accessibility to that area, go ahead and check out the event and register if you can on that, or if you plan to attend. It would be a great event for that, and you find all kinds of details out here about the event and the costs. It still amazes me at the low cost of the DNN Connect events because, you know, for those of you that have been to DNN Summit but have never been to a DNN Connect event, it's quite different. It's a little bit more social based, and there's always meals together and things like that, which is really nice. So really your lodging and your meals, it's all inclusive in the event fee on that. So it's amazingly affordable.
Including accommodation.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the drinks, right?
Yeah, but even but you don't it's including the accommodation, so you don't have to pay for extra for a hotel, so it's all included, and that's really worth the money.
It's a beautiful venue as well. Sebastian, did you go to the one that was in Millau?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's really nice, and nice in the countryside. It's not at the coast this time, but it's nice on the countryside, and it's really a pleasure to be there. And in the summer, it should be really a great scenery, and also a great pleasure. And I think usually in summer, COVID is not a big problem, and so I expect that it will be much easier to be together. And
exactly. Now, this photo here, I'll mention. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the pool? It's like like an edgeless pool or something. I know the pool was very popular.
There's a pool, yeah.
So a lot of good times had around that pool in the previous event. So yeah, check that out. You can go to dnn-connect.org or dnnconnect.org, and it'll forward you there. And under events, go to the 2022 page and get more details about that. Excellent. Does anybody have any other community-related announcements that are worth highlighting here? Daniel, do you have any updates on DNN platform or anything as far as, like, I know things are still kind of in progress to prepare for 9.10.
Yeah, I think me and you were both missing on the last meeting, so I don't have anything fresh. But yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned this in the last couple ones, but just to reiterate, the next release is more focused on getting to a better state with the default experience as it relates to Telric and not being a part of that. Of course, it's been optional to remove that since 9.8.0. But in the next release, you know, unless you're doing an upgrade, it by default will install with Telric removed, and you'll have the option on upgrades to remove those in a more automated fashion rather than a manual process. Other than that, I know there's been some talk of DNN10 and some of the plans for that as well. Yeah,
Which, by the way, is a test ground to iron out all the bugs of upgrades, because the process that you will opt in to remove Telerik will be the exact same that will be enforced in then. So when that comes out, I urge everybody to test it out and make sure that this process works fine, because it's a bit complex.
Yes, yes. I've seen a few pull requests already come in. I believe Peter Donker put in a few of them, as well as I put in a few small ones just to help with some of the punch list of items that are supposed to be for 9.10, and I believe a few others have plans over the next weeks to come to try to push it forward and see if we can get to a release. I know we all had dreams of grandeur of it kind of being out by December or so, but as with any other open source project, it kind of you can't like commit to dates because people's availability and giving you free of their time and so forth. It just kind of falls the way that it falls, but hopefully we'll be able to see that release soon. Any other announcements worth highlighting? Okay. Well, let's switch gears here and introduce our first speaker. Many of you know Sebastian Leupold, and he's going to be joining today to talk a little bit about internationalization and localization. I know this is, I don't have as much experience with localization as I would love to have, but we just don't have a whole lot of opportunity for that. But when the opportunity does come, this is great information to know, because it is not always straightforward and obvious how things should be set up and configured. So enjoy Sebastian's presentation today on this, and learn, take notes, bookmark this presentation for the future, because hopefully you'll have a few aha moments on how to deal with localization in DNN. Sebastian, thank you for joining us, and I will stop sharing the screen, and you're welcome to take it away.
Thank you. So how do I do? Okay. Give me a second. Yeah. Okay, dealing with all the technique, but sometime it should work.
Meanwhile, in the video background, I'm enjoying Sebastian's library wall. I've always wanted to have a room that I was allowed to put nothing but bookcases into, and I've never won that vote in the family yet. I love that type of room setup, especially with those wide drawers behind you for drawings and maps and big plans. Love it.
Yeah, my father was an architect, and he had a room with all books around. So, but we had to. I wasn't able to, or we weren't able to keep all of them. So most of them went away because I had already a few, like you can see. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
With the presentation? Okay. Yeah, I'd like to talk about internationalization. This is a short version of this word, commonly used. I learned in the US. First question: who of you has is already using DNN either in a single foreign language or in multilingual sites? David for sure. David, the other David as well. Okay. Daniel and Rhino as well. Okay, great. And the others I can't see, but looks like you already have some experience, which is not common for all the DNN admins I know. So what I'm talking, what I would like to talk about is what are the requirements in general for a for an internationalized site? What are the features DNN provides, and maybe we find enough time to do some hands-on or some demo and how DNN can be used in this scenario as well. So what are the areas of concern? Of course, the main area is language, and DNN has separated this, or by technical nature, this is static content and semi-static, what I call. To be clear, static content is something like captions, like anything you can provide, you can distribute with a software. For a content management system, of course, it's important for the end users to have the content being localized, being available in the users' languages. And often forgotten, there's some semi-static content. That means content which is not which is provided by the admin or configured by the admin, like role names, like some lists options, which are not dynamic on the current content, but needs to be localized as well. One of the important thing, of course, when you're going international is being able to provide the proper date and time, to provide it in proper format. That's for some strange reasons, although we use the same clock, time always looks different wherever you are on the world, especially on both sides of the Atlantic. And even in Europe, it's different, different areas, how we write dates or times. And
this is one of our favorite pastimes, Sebastian, is actually dealing with dates and times. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and if you consider 9/11, or what do we does mean a different date in the US, although it's written the same way with slashes, but 9/11/22 would be a different date meant in the US than in Great Britain, because for you it's September, for them it's November. So that's definitely something not very easy to get just if you don't have the context. And in Europe, it's most common we use dots, so then it's clear. It's usually day, month, year. But yeah, with slashes, it's not as easy. And of course, we have different currencies, currency firm formats. We have different dimensions for lengths. Some people still use foot and whatever strange measures for weight. We use kilo. All the modern countries, some use still stones or pounds.
What's funny when you're Canadian is that you're stuck in the middle of two systems. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's centimeters, sometimes it's inches. It depends what you're measuring.
Yeah, that's strange. Or temperature. I always have difficulties if I hear, oh, it's over 100 degrees, and I say, oh, it's cooking. No, it's Fahrenheit. It's a little bit different. It's not as high. And although we have technically, we do have an absolute scale, which is Kelvin, but it's not used in daily use for all of us, which would be, of course, easier to understand each other. But yeah, we have to live with this variety. And of course, there are different standards, like different screws and different other things. We have different, if you go into different countries, you have different taxes, you have different toll systems, you have or toll strategies, you have shipment fees, which will become different. This is of course something for e-commerce, and most of the currencies and dimensions will happen in content only. And those are areas, of course, we cannot solve with a platform, but it's something you have to take care of when you provide content. And the same as with legislation. What is the term of use? How are the terms of use? What do you have to take care of? Kind of data protection, you know, GDPR is a big subject in Germany and all Europe. But also whether it's allowed to provide anything without tax, any price without taxes, or does it always have to be with tax? So those are things you have to take to be aware of. And if you want to sell, for example, to end customers in consumers in around the world, you have to take care of warranty regulation and lots of others. And of course, besides these are some soft facts or some other things you have to be aware of, like what nudity is allowed in your content. It's different in the US than in Europe. For us, some nipples would be no problem in Europe, even if this if minors are allowed to use the site. But in the US, that's you will get a jail immediately. But here, if you would sell a gun, that you would be prosecuted, while that's normal in the US. So there are different areas where it's how things are taken and how they're considered, and how strong is the focus on business, what are meanings of symbols and names. Some international companies had to rename their product because they had a special, their name had a special meaning. I think was Pajero once, a car which is was sold in Northern Europe and I think in the US with no problems, but in Spanish-speaking countries that was not really friendly, and so they had to rename the product and find a different name for it. So providing things for around the world is not easy, and if you want to sell across the borders, then you should, my advice would be you should have someone in that country you could at least cross-check and make sure that you don't hit any of those limitations or local rules. Any questions so far?
Yes, what time is it?
Am I too slow? Sorry. or what do you mean? Or what time is it here?
I was just joking. Yeah, I was like, yeah, what time is it? Because we have so many time zones represented here. So.
Yeah, it's a times format is, of course, some countries can count up to 24, some others only to 12. So, and they have some A and P. So, of course, there are differences all around the world, and making it not much easier to display. And of course, for the US, it's normal to have always a time zone annotated, but in Europe, we always, most of Europe use the same time zone. So we usually just say that's as the time without any PST, EST, or whatever. But when
really, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, it's only Portugal and Great Britain and Ireland use a different time zone in the West, and on the East, I think it's Belarus and Ukraine, which use, and Finland, which use a different time zone. But all other countries in Europe use European Central Time, making it much easier.
I was hearing something about daytime the other day, a YouTube video, and it was really interesting. Daylight saving time If you're converting from UTC to whatever time zone that has daylight saving time, you have one answer. But if you're going from the local time to UTC, you can have two possible answers when you bring the time back.
Mhm.
And there is no way to know which one is right.
Yeah, you have to know what's the starting and what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to know whether you are on daylight saving time, or you need to have the date with it, of course. But even that is sometimes challenging because the US uses different dates to switch between daylight saving time and winter time than the rest of the world. So we have usually, I remember from all our team meetings, in the core team, etc., that in springtime and in autumn there were 3 or 4 weeks when it differed for 1 more hours than usual. So something we had to teach, or 1 hour less, sorry. We have to, you have to take in consideration, of course. Doesn't make it easier. Okay, so those are lots of requirements if you want to provide a website for international audience, and those are it's just a short checklist what you might consider before you really go online with a site that should target an audience in a different country. So what do we have in DNN? What are the localization features included in the platform? There's of course date and currency formats. Those are provided by .NET Framework, not specific by DNN. We only need to make sure that we use the proper culture, and then we will get the proper formats for those elements, which makes it quite easy. And then we have, so that's included with DNN since version 1. So, but for the first 2 versions, we didn't have any localization of language of the texts. I remember when I started with DNN, I think at 2, and I was I was translating it in the source code. So I was taking all the source code and all the ASCX files and the others and converting, checking for strings and converting English strings to German strings, which doesn't always fit. But I'll come to the challenges a little bit later.
That's
and then we
the
have
sign of a true OG right there, people.
Sorry?
So that is the sign of a true OG there, where you were modifying the core code just to
Yeah.
localize it.
That was the only option at that time, and even with the DNN one was derived from the iPortal workshop. iBuySpy website or something like this, and even that
portal and iBuySpy
Yeah.
store and then iBuySpy workshop.
Yeah, iBuySpy portal, and that didn't support localization at all. Although it comes from a company which should already have some experience with localized software, but yeah, we always wonder how bad it is when we get new versions of Windows or Office. So no wonder. It's obvious that it's mainly developed in one country. Okay, but when I started in DNN2 and had to translate everything in the source code, then it was really a great step forward in DNN3 when we got static localization, and were able to use DNN really out of the box with a language pack in as it for German websites. But providing it for multiple languages, even with content, there were some community members who provided solutions, like Eric van Balagoy, but it wasn't built into the core until DNN version 5.4. And there were still some areas missing at that time, and that took really until DNN 7 to get list localization. And there's still, even in the current versions, there are still a few areas where we don't have localization included, although those are a little bit minor. And finally, we got GDPR support in DNN 9.5 by Peter Donker. I will come to that a little bit later. So what is static localization? This was added by Vicens Mazanas, and it allows you to provide any text which comes with DNN, and for tables, list headers, and all the texts you use in messages and so on. In theory, you can now localize everything which is in DNN. Even this supports not just the core, but also third-party modules or providers. But some developers still used to combine sentences by using a word from the resource file and then some dynamic element like a name or a date format, and then another element from the another text from the resource file, and just making the phrases up by concatenation. And then that's really challenging for a translator, because you always need to have in mind that other languages provide sentences in a different order. And then this really will fail, or it will. Most of the time it's possible to translate, but it looks a little bit strange, or it sounds a little bit strange. So DNN usually provides the option to use wildcards or placeholders, and that's something a module developer should consider to use, instead of just using those single words and concatenate it itself. And if you consider we also have languages which run from right to left, then this concatenation might even get more difficult. So the static localization stores all those texts using a key and a content, a data, and puts it into a language file, and or lots of those keys, and puts them into a file, and lots of those files then into a language pack. And I think one of the great features Vicens implemented was the support of 3 levels, like we have in DNN, this host and website level. And besides this, there's also the system level, which means those are the files coming with DNN platform, or with a module, or with a language pack for either or. And then you can override any of those texts on a host or on a website level, and then which are overriding those default texts. And but these won't be overwritten when you update the core or language pack or the third-party module or skin, and that's for sure a benefit. Otherwise, you would start all over, like we had to do when we started in DNN2 to localize in the source code. So that's really a great separation of concerns. And for editing this as a built-in language editor, you can find within the DNN website settings, which allows you to edit all this. It's not really the most comfortable tool, but it's very well, very easy to translate. There is no support in there for automated translation, like using Google Translator also. But to be honest, I'm not a big fan of these, because although these tools have evolved over the past years, They really it's not really a compliment for the website owner. It's obvious that this is not not done by a professional translator. And I know what I'm talking of because I did hundreds of language packs. I'm translating DNN into German language since DNN version 3. Because when that was announced, and it was announced to be localizable, and it comes with 2 languages at that time, and it was English and German. And I said, oh, great. And I installed it, and I said, oh, shit. Because it was an automated translation, and it was really, so.
Yeah, it was dictionary translation.
Yeah. And I contacted Sean and say, okay, I'm providing a better translation, and I take care of this German translation in the future. So then we will have a better version. And nowadays, DNN comes with 6 languages, including French, Spanish, German, Dutch, English. Do I miss one? I think those are. And Italian, sorry, yes. Those are the 6 languages. We do not have in our team or in the team of the community as someone who is translating actively to Arab or China, but it's mainly a problem that we do not have contact to the users over there. I know that it's been used in Persia or in Iran and in other Arab countries very well, and as well as in China. So that could be, yeah, it sometimes would be helpful if you could extend the default list, but yeah, it's not very easy. Okay, so we talked just about language packs. That's another tool we have, or that's something. If you have this translation, a language packs allows you to have all those translated texts put together in a zip, all those translation files, and make it installable like any other DNN extension. There's also there are built-in tools for checking the language packs, whether it's complete. Or which keys are missing, and there's also built-in tool for creating a language pack out of the current site, which makes it easy to, if you improve the language pack and want to keep it or want to transfer it to another of your sites, to hand it over or to install it over there as well. There's also an extra tool from Peter Donker. It's a collaborative localization editor. I think it's on Codeplex as well, on GitHub as well. As the tool is available, and that allows to see how many people who did translate what, and you can translate just a few files and upload in there. And I think a few of the translators already use it. Daniel, are you using the editor from Peter or the built-in one? Or
sometimes one, sometimes the other. I try to use the DNN built-in one whenever possible. When I have like a bigger task to do, then I grab. They all have their pros and cons, so it depends on the situation.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a different tool, and but you need to know that the editor from Peter doesn't work directly on the files within your site. The benefit in the built-in language editor is that you can translate, you can save, and if you know by the name which element should be affected, then you can control and see, okay, does it work? Did it work or did it not work? And then you can correct your translation, because there's no tool in the user interface to tell you where this string comes from, how it was translated, so or whether it was translated at all and from which file it comes from. So that's of course.
Ernst Peter, I think, uses that tool.
Yeah, I know he uses it a lot. he was always a big fan of Peter's tool. That's helpful if you. I think it's a great benefit if you're working with multiple translators on it, because otherwise, with the built-in one, it's really a challenge to put the translation together. That works much better by the one from Peter, but that requires you to zip up the file, to create a language pack, to install the language pack afterwards, before you can view whether everything has been translated or there's something missing. That's, of course, one of the downsides. Language packs for the core and the 6 languages I mentioned before, they are offered by DNN already as in the section, in the extension section, as a valuable language. At the moment, some of them are not really updated, and in former times they even used to be provided in the install screen. But I noticed that it's no longer included in there. I don't know why. Daniel, do you have any insight on that? No.
I am sorry, what was the question?
The install wizard for DNN. It used to have this selection for the language you want to install, but nowadays there is exactly one option, that's English.
It's still there, but it relies on a service. So I don't know if something went wrong with that service. I know it's
no, the service is there. If you go to extensions,
yeah,
then it lists all the languages, but not the but not in the install wizard. So maybe we need to check where it comes from.
okay,
I will have a look.
Might be a bug there. As
Yeah.
far as I know, I don't think it was removed, so I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, the language, the dropdown is still there, but it's only one language, and that's English. Although the others seem to be available. So that's something we need to check. But otherwise, it's a nice experience that you can see the install wizard already in the proper language, and you can select the proper language for your website, and you get it directly without just any extra steps to add another language and so on. To provide it in German or in French or wherever you are in the proper language. So, those core language packs are offered by the DNN extensions page, and the other extension language packs and or the language packs for other languages and for all the extensions are available on dnncommunity.org, right? There is a or DNN Connect, sorry. I think there's a big language pack directory where you can select languages, this is a language pack you need. Okay, what are those ResX files for static localization? They're standard XML. The format is defined by .NET or by Microsoft. It's a standard XML format with a specific syntax, and allows a couple of annotations, but DNN just uses the title and the content option. So you have every translation is just the title and the content for it. And the content is HTML encoded. That's something, if you are going into one of those files to edit something directly, make sure that you don't break the HTML encoding. And usually there's one file per ASCX, and there are also some shared files for either DNN and for each extension and component you're having. And it's not used just for the core, but also for modules, providers, and even skins and containers can have language files for texts they're using, usually by using the text skin object, which is you can place in a skin file. It's not very common in containers, but in skins, that's nice to have. although the all other skin objects provide localization as well within the DNN framework usually. Okay, what is content localization? I think that's something. Who of you did have a look at it? Daniel, of course. Anyone else using content localization here? Yeah. Okay. Content localization was added in DNN 5.4 by DNN Corporation. To be honest, I'm still not very happy with the solution, but it's I call it language-specific pages. It has a concept of creating a copy of each page and providing a workflow for a translator to translate this content, but it has very little support for multilingual content, and that makes it very hard to use. It creates a copy of each page by creating copy of each module, and then you have, if you have a multilingual module, then you have some extra tasks to do to provide to make sure that this is being used as a single module is being used on multiple for multiple languages, and makes it yes, a little bit more challenging. And you can have it's a little bit easier for on neutral pages. Traditionally, those neutral pages were the admin and the host menu, because they didn't usually didn't need a translation or just static translation, not really for content, and so those are a little bit not really not handled very well in DNN, and so you need to consider it's like having copies of your website in each language, but just with links between those pages and links between the modules to see which module is translated, which module is not translated, which module instance, or which page is ready for publishing or which is not ready for publishing. And for this, to make this a little bit easier, there is in page settings, you get an overview of all the localized copies of the page, and in website settings, you get an overview of all the pages, whether they are translated in which language and so on. But be aware that if you enable content localization for a website, you will immediately create a copy of each page for each for each language which is currently being enabled for the website, and that can take quite a long time. And also it creates, of course, a huge amount of data within your database, and so you if you want to disable it, I'm not sure whether all of this will be gone afterwards, so you might have a little bit of cleanup task otherwise. So I always encourage people who want to use it to make a copy of the site first and test it and consider how their workflow for translation would fit best. There are also other opportunities what you can use to if you want to use or just a few pages in a different language, then it might be easier to just use some skin options, to use a specific skin for that for the additional page, and to make sure that the additional page is and these put those additional pages just in a separate branch of your menu, and then you can just show this specific menu in the other language. It's something we do for a couple of clients because it's easier to handle. You don't need to translate to consider translating everything, and the people will just see if they switch language, they just see the pages available in that language as well. We have this for a couple of clients which just want to provide a little bit of content for international visitors. Questions for content localization?
Actually, I have one that I'm not doesn't entirely fit, but I do a lot of work with Canadian websites that have a French and English part.
Mm-hmm.
But inevitably, when I create my website, the creation of it is done in English US, and then I add the English Canadian, English, and then French Canadian. But I'm stuck with this US part. Is there a way to avoid that? It doesn't really matter because in the end I just hide it. But
yeah, one option would be that you create a English Canadian really language pack, but usually that's not really necessary. You can in languages you can just say instead of installing language pack, you can say just add language, and you say I'm adding language ENCA, which has a fallback on ENUS, so you don't really need to provide any content. And then you can do the same with a France language pack for French Canadian, and then you have both available, and you just say, okay, those others are still installed, but you disable them for the site, and then your language selector will just contain the English Canadian flag and the French Canadian flag, and yeah, or how you or just the words EN and US EN and FR, or how you created your language selector. So that would be the best way to do that.
yeah, that's exactly what I do, and then I make only active the EN. CA, so that they get the Canadian flag. One thing that sucks with flags though is that we have the same flag for both languages. So I usually do some skin object that shows the text instead of the flag.
Yeah, I remember some clients in Switzerland. Switzerland is a very small country, even much smaller than the Canada, but they have 4 official languages. Okay, 3 are really used, so they use their flag, and they had a small different flag from the main country in the corner, or the word or the letters. That's of course an option, but it depends how you create your flag. That's up to you. There is no really real option, because a language flag doesn't point to a language. It just displays a nation, not a language. There's no visual representation for language, to be honest. Does it answer your question, Steve?
Yeah.
Great. In DNN 7.4, Peter Donker added the list localization. That was one of the bigger areas which was missing for country names, and especially for country names and for region names. So those are now provided with DNN in the language packs as files, which are stored in the shared resources folder. That's an option. There's one file for each, one smaller file for the countries, and a very big one for all regions of all countries. And this makes it really difficult if you have added or you are updating the list of countries and list of regions, to keep those keys maintained. So that's something which is puts an extra task on you to make sure that if you edit something in here, they are overwritten. So you have to make sure that you do your changes in on the portal or on the host level, and in order not to get it overwritten up on the next DNN upgrade. Because of course there are sometimes new countries or countries renamed, like North Macedonia, where you need to make sure during an update or they are updated in bigger frequencies within the DNN framework. But if you update it for your site before, then you need to make sure that those changes will be kept. And the last internationalization extra, which came in DNN 9, sorry, not 9.9, but in 9.5, I think, it was GDPR support, which consists of cookie consent, of the option to list and export all data of a single user, or if he has a request that he wants to have all his data being deleted, that you have an option to delete this. This is not everything, really. That's not sufficient for being compliant with GDPR, but that's what we can do on the platform level. But if you want to have GDPR, if you're in a European country and you want to be 100% GDPR compliant, you need to have a GDPR officer assigned. You need to make sure you have documented all the workflow of user data you're storing for individual users, whether they are website visitors or whether they are clients or whether they are members, employees of your company. That takes a lot of effort, and the website is just usually just a small part of it. Questions?
Just a comment from my experience is that doing Canadian websites where I have to have parallel between English and French, I find that the two sexy components work very nicely. That the way of handling the two sides of the language works out quite smoothly. So when I tend to use those components for my website creations.
Yes, they're from Switzerland, and they have this problem every day.
Yeah.
Because they have at least three languages to provide for all their websites. So of course they take care of this and know this very well. Whereas DNN Corp, when they added content localization, had very little own experience with providing multilingual sites. So yeah, that's why it is what it is. Sorry. Okay, so let's have a look where you enable and disable all this stuff. Let's go in. Now I need to switch. Give me a second. Do you see my DNN now? Sorry? Yes? Okay.
Yes, yes. All
Yeah,
good.
sorry, it's a challenge with multiple monitors, and I'm not that used to the Zoom, to the Zoom client. Yeah. Okay. So what I said before, most of the things are in site settings. Here you have a section for languages. Okay. I need to log in again, sorry. Timed out. So if I'm going to site settings and going to languages, you see that I have two cultures installed by just installing the German language pack. And after I installed it, I had to go into the edit option and had to enable it, just putting here's a switch. And then I got two languages for my site, which is the English and the German one. And you see immediately that you have the two flags here in the admin area and also usually on the skin, if it has a language selector included. Besides, you have the option in settings down here to specify a site default language. That means which is the default language a site should show up when his visitor is coming and visits the site the first time. Usually afterwards, after he selected the language selection is stored in a cookie. And if he's logging in, he has even the option in his profile to provide to specify his preferred language, and that will be used for the next login as well. So that's something you should take care of, and then you can enable language browser detection. This is enabled by default and usually makes sense. That means that the browser, its website checks languages, preferred languages you specified in your browser settings, and looks for the language that is best fitting to your selection. Okay, you also can use the language in the URL, which makes the language parameter, which should be done always. Otherwise, you will have multiple different languages in your website under the same URL with different content, which is not very good for SEO. Okay, and there's a very dangerous button for allow content localization that's being used if you want to provide the same content in multiple languages. You want to have really a multilingual site. Here are also the as a resource as a language pack verifier and the language pack creator tool you can call down here. So if I close, you see up here the language selector in the skin. That will be visible not only for admins, but also for any other user once you have more than one active language for your site. Okay. One thing which is very well hidden on this page is a language editor. The language editor, it's hidden behind this symbol. It's really something you need to know. If you want to enter the language editor, you have to click this icon, and then you get into the translator and you select the file, and you have to know that's one of the challenges in which file your key you want to translate is. And then you can select choose for one of the files. By default, it's a global resources file, which is displayed or used. Oh, it was displayed. This is no longer. Sorry. And then once you select the language file, then you can get the list of keys of the key. With a key in front, the default value in English or in the master language, if you're just modifying an existing language pack, and or overriding just a few keys, and then you get your localized value you can enter here very easily. Up here you see the mode. This is very important. And you should always make sure that you have the right mode selected up here. Global means this is a mode for the system. We used to have a system, I think, before. That means those are files either coming with DNN platform or with extensions or if it's another language, with a language pack. But it's means that's not something you have specific for your site. If you click switch to the host level, then that would mean that you want to modify, in this case, the German language packs installed just for all your websites to make sure that because you have some specific text on your site. And if you go to the last item, which is called DNN Platform 96.2, which is the name of this website, and then you will edit the language pack just for this specific website. When would you do something like this? If you have a different wording, for example, for your websites, or you find a bug in the language pack and you want to override because it's hurting you, then you would usually use the host level, because you would contact the language pack developer and ask him to fix it, or the core developer or the module developer to fix the spelling issue. And with the next update, you would get it a corrected version. But if there are also a few keys which are site specific, like further down you find the messages, the content of the emails, like here, and those email content is something which is usually specific to your site. You might use a different content in your email body for some specific notes, like please do not reply to this email. In one site you would maybe use a different phrase, or even further down there are the terms of use and also the privacy statement, and those texts should always be adapted to your website, because the default text that comes with DNN is made for about 10 years ago for a company in Washington State, and that's clearly written in the or in California. It's written in the text, so you would have to make sure that those texts fit the need of your website. And if you see those texts going down, give me a second. Message portal terms, for example. If you see the texts are quite long, and these text boxes are not really nice to edit it, there is a specific tool which is called the Rich Text Editor. If you click that, then you get a bigger window, and you can edit it much more comfortable. And HTML decoded, and once you click save, then it gets HTML encoded, and when you save the file into the resx, the data into the resx file. Question to this? Anyone got any problems with this editor before? Okay. Good. Okay. So what will happen if I click the allow content localization feature? Once I click it, nothing happens because it just shows a button. We had the switch built in because it's really something you need to be aware of. You shouldn't, it's hard to undo. There's not really an undo option. You can disable the additional languages, but the additional pages will be still in the database, and you will still take them with you around for the future of your lifetime of your website. Okay, save. And enable. And there's another warning that is might take time, and then you can say, okay, I would like to have all pages translatable, and I click enable this, and then you see that it creates in this instance, it's just a home page, and I think the resources page, but if you have a large website with thousands of websites, this can be very time consuming. Make sure it doesn't get interrupted, and always make sure that you create a backup first. So, and once you have this done, then you have multilingual website. And now if I go into page settings, hopefully, oops. You see this extra section for localization, and you find here which some properties you can translate, and the modules on the page where you can translate the title, and you can specify whether they're already translated and whether they are ready for publishing. And you can also use this specific button, which means that it's connected to the default language in your translation. In this version, to be clear, on the very left side, you have the base language, the portal default language, which I switched to German. And the translated would be English. And of course, in this case, I need to fix I would here call this edit the German ones, because I didn't use modifications of the default template. But if you start with a complete German or Canadian French version, then you want to translate it to English, then you would have to see all the French words left and right, and then you can overwrite the text on the right hand side and fix it to make sure that the translated text is the correct one. And once you finish that, then you click it's translated, and once you're ready with that, then you click it's published, and then you will have this page being published. Okay. And there's also a button to make a localized page neutral. That means that this page doesn't support any localization, but in that moment, you are not able to provide a localized title, nor localized module titles. You just get the same page for each language. But you can use it for if you have admin pages where translation is not really having translated languages is not really necessary. It would be unnecessary burden for the database. And this connect to disable localization for a single module. That's something you would use if you have a multilingual module which provides localization in itself. Clear? Like Too Sexy Content. Because otherwise you have copies, and then you have you make changes in the English version, and they won't show up in the German ones because you have two copies of the same module, which is not helpful. Okay. Any other questions?
It's been a while, but I found that over time, the initial setup of the multi-language ability is wonderful, but then keeping up the content and keeping up the updates to that content over time is what falls behind. What do you have as suggestions for getting those content editors and the site
management to stay on top of their translations.
Usually it's done, you should be able, or usually if you add a module, then of course it shows up in this list or in site settings, where you have, I think there used to be, no, we have, sorry. No, not site settings. Give me a second. And we have it in the page. Here you see, you can see which pages do have localization, and you can check. But of course, if it's within the within a single module, the content, then of course DNN, the platform, doesn't have any knowledge that this content has been updated and needs to be checked against localization. That's something which is missing, and maybe that's something we could add in the platform, that we make sure that this translated there should be a modified a button which should be automatically unchecks the translated button.
Uncheck is untranslated, right?
Yeah. And this is currently not happening.
Yeah, we made an audit screen for managers on one site where it highlighted the content which had more recent translations or more recent updates in one language versus another, so that you could see there was a disparity in something had been changed in one, but not changed in all three languages. So the point was to highlight when it gets out of sync, when they keep making updates to the English only, and then never go back to the French or the Spanish to also make updates to links or names or text or whatever's inside that content.
I just considered it should be possible to use a trigger in the database to, whenever some module content is, whenever the module is updated, but the module is not getting updated. That's a problem. Not necessarily if you update content of a module, you won't get, the module itself doesn't get necessarily, or the last update date doesn't get updated. No, it does get updated, right? Yeah, it needs for indexing. So that would be an option, to have a trigger that checks the state and say, okay, in this case, I look for disable translated for all the translated pages. That would be an option. Maybe that could be that would automate this process. Would that help you, Ryan?
I think there are outside cases where maybe that doesn't always hold, but yes, in the situations that we experienced, that's exactly what would help. It just helps bring to the forefront or make people aware that they've only done one part of their responsibility if they edit one language, but not the others.
Yeah, DNN also includes, once you whenever you enable this content localization and have more than one language, it also includes or creates roles for translators. Like here, this translator ENUS role, which was automatically created when I enabled content localization. But what's really missing is a screen, where you can see, okay, what do I have to do? What do I have to look for? This is something, it would be really a great improvement in the future.
Yes, yes.
Hi, Sebastian. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I've not done this before, and so I'm missing a step. I understand the settings, and I followed you how you enabled content localization, but the example site you have here is just the default DNN site. How does one go about doing the next step, which is changing that blue block there at the top of the page to German from English? Where does that happen?
Sorry, what do you mean? Which you mean the language selector? Here? Oh,
Yes, I mean, here I have, yeah, click the German flag and what happens to the page?
In this case, you won't see much difference because I haven't really translated it, but usually it would switch directly the language from the English to the German language.
I get that, and I understand that's what it's supposed to do, but what I'm missing is how do I get there? At this point here, I'm editing the site. I've just installed the German pack, and now I
Yes.
want to make this page look German. What do I do?
You go to site settings. And, oh, sorry, I need to switch back to English. Second.
Don, is your question more about the content or is it about?
Yes, the content.
Yeah, because there's localization of many different pieces of DNN. So
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Am I jumping ahead? Are you planning to show how to change this blue block that says every journey begins into German so that we see the process of what the next step is to change it?
The first step is that you go to languages, you install the language, and the second step, what you need to do now is to enable the language.
Yes, understand.
And once it's
Followed all
enabled,
along.
yeah, and then you will see the flags.
Yes, understand.
And at this moment, you are ready to provide content to enable content localization, so like I just did.
Yep.
And then you create copies. That will create the copies, and then you can go into the translated pages into these copies and provide the translations. That means you just edit the content using in German by using German language.
yeah, just to bridge the gap here, Don, you basically go to the actual module, like in this case, it's HTML module. You
Okay,
switch the
so
language
you
to the
click on the
language.
German flag,
Yeah,
then
then
you
just
click
it
edit
like you normally
page,
would.
and then you
Yeah.
click edit the module.
Yeah,
Yes.
just like you normally would, but you would then put in German, and then it would save it in a localized fashion, and then you can flip flop.
Got it.
So
Got
maybe
it.
you
That's
would,
the missing piece.
Okay, sorry. So I changed it, and now I changed it just for the German version, and the English version is still the old one.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
So that's the big step you have then. And once you translated it, you would go into page settings and would say, okay, this is now translated, and I can be published in the other language.
So how does a person actually, what's the practical way of doing this? Do you put two screens up like side by side and have the one showing the English translation and the other showing the
You get
other language
you already get the copy of the English language, and you would just overwrite the English text by a German translation. So you know what you have to translate. You can do it in the text like I just did. I know what has been. Of course, it sometimes it's helpful to have a second window, a browser window where you just have the original text because you want to see how long it is. Also, be aware if you're a module developer. Also, please be aware that texts, static texts you have, should have enough space, because other languages like French and German are usually much longer than the English one.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? So my idea would be just test it out. If you have questions, just contact me. And thank you for your patience, and thank you. Sorry for David for taking too much time.
Oh, no worries at all. Yeah, thank you for presenting this, Sebastian. It's a
Good
quite
cover.
a complex subject, and I know a lot of people get confused easily in what they're translating, where where those settings are, and the clunkiness kind of
Yeah,
that's
it's
great.
not very easy, and I would have preferred to have a different solution where you have really the modules in localized versions instead of using those localized pages, which in my opinion makes it difficult. It's easier, of course, to have a different structure as the same page in different languages, which if you want to have different modules on the totally different content, but then you would have different sites usually. Currently, if you want to make it really a translated site, this makes it, yeah, you have to be very strict and very concrete to know what can be, how it could be done, and how you handle the workflow. Otherwise, you can get oversee, and you have English version which doesn't meet the German version or whatever. And
One
if you
more
have, sorry.
Can I ask one more question? If you, for instance, you mentioned about how you wouldn't translate a module that already handles localization. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of, I'm a big fan of Easy DNN News, for instance. So if I use their localization, which I've not used yet, but I'm trying to plan ahead. If I use theirs, then I would mark saying that don't translate it.
Right.
But when I switch from does Easy DNN News or other modules that follow localization, do they understand the system level settings so that when I flip
They don't know about static localization is always the captions and so on. That's always already built into the module. But if Too Sexy Content or another content module provides multilingual support for multilingual content, then you should click here to disable translation, because otherwise you will have really copies of the module for each language, and then the content will break apart. If you have like news, you won't be able to translate a single news, because on the English page you have different news lists than on the German. You have a different module instance than like on the German page.
Actually, done. Easy DNN News supports it out of the box, and it just kind of works the way that you would expect it to work with like an HTML module, where you just switch the language of the of the site, and then you edit the article in Easy DNN News, and it will edit it, that language's version of it, and then you just flip flop back and forth.
Got it. Okay.
I'm not sure how. Of course, I haven't used Easy DNN News, so I'm not sure whether you need to take care that it's installed, that the instance is not a localized one. I'm not sure how they handle that. That's a problem. It's a gap in DNN localization, that the module cannot tell the platform about its localization capabilities, and that the platform would have the proper default and say, okay, if I provide content localization, if I enable content localization, I use this as a chat module. This is a missing piece we currently have in the web platform.
Thanks so much, Sebastian, for presenting.
You're welcome.
I'm glad that we covered this, and glad you're recovering as well.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess we'll switch gears here. I'm going to do a crash course on web components here, and go there. We'll try to respect everybody's time as much as possible here. Everybody able to see the screen okay with web components?
Yes, looking good.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, I am David, just in case you didn't know. This is not really a formal presentation, but more of a kind of a working presentation. Recently, we've had some conversations in the DNN community Slack about web components and how they work, and what the value proposition is for using them and so forth. So it comes up quite often, and recently I'm gonna pick on Aaron Lopez here just a little bit since he's not here to defend himself. But he was saying, you know, I appreciate the tell of this, but I operate off of the show of it, you know, and so like show me, you know, what this means instead of just telling. Or telling is powerful, but it's like you're left to bridge the gaps yourself and just kind of, you know, figure things out. Well, several of us in the community have been using web components for quite some time, and just I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here, but I just wanted to give a quick overview of web components. The biggest value proposition of web components is that it is standards based. And what I mean by that is not some fancy new framework that's out there or library, you know, like we think of when we think of like Bootstrap as a CSS framework, Tailwind as a CSS framework, Angular is a JavaScript kind of based or TypeScript based library for building applications, or framework, I should say. It's not really a library. jQuery would be a library, right? Well, web components is not any of those kind of things. It's not something that an individual or a group of individuals sat around and came up with and said, here is our opinion of the way that you should build apps moving forward. Well, web components is actually a standard. And what I mean by that is that it's based off of the W3C standards. It's actually built into the core of browser support and so forth. So like this is an example of the MDN web docs Mozilla documentation, which, you know, kind of the de facto standard, and web components is talked about here. And there are different kind of segments of web components. And a lot of times the people are referring to custom elements a lot when referring to web components. So those are somewhat synonymous. Web components is kind of an overarching idea, but custom elements is like just like you have a paragraph tag in HTML. Well, you can have a my dash paragraph tag in there, and that would be a custom paragraph HTML element. So it's really nothing more than that. It's not super fancy or hard to understand. It's really at the core, allowing you to use these things just like you would use normal HTML, the markup language itself. There's a concept of the shadow DOM in here, and this is kind of like an encapsulation of the document object model. So the entire page, you know, is part of the DOM, the document object model, but you have these little mini DOMs or shadow DOMs where you can encapsulate some functionality for your custom element. So that's really kind of what that is. And then there's a concept of HTML templates as well, which we won't really touch on today. But I'll jump back over. This is webcomponents.org. There was a time where these various elements were not fully supported in modern browsers, and they required polyfills to actually provide that backwards compatibility to those browsers and make them function, which really wasn't a huge deal, but it did add an extra like 4 kilobytes file to be able to support that in a backwards compatible behavior. But now you can see from this grid that all modern browsers are fully supported and in a stable fashion for web components. So it's really safe to start using them with no hesitation whatsoever. One of the biggest benefits of using web components is that you are now no longer framework dependent. So if you're building Angular applications, you're dependent on the Angular framework and all of its downline dependencies. If you're using React to build apps, you're dependent on React. If you're using Bootstrap, you're dependent on Bootstrap. If you're using Tailwind, you're dependent on Tailwind. Those are all dependencies, and we know painfully well that DNN has a ton of dependencies over the years. And the goal is to shift away from a lot of those dependencies, because they become, it's not that those frameworks aren't any good or anything like that. It's really not about that at all. It really comes down to the maintenance of those dependencies. So the big benefit of web components is there are no dependencies because it's standard. It's just HTML, some JavaScript, and CSS, pure CSS in JavaScript. So it's there is no maintenance. There's no Angular jumped up to to whatever version, Angular 55 or whatever they're on now, and we now have to update all of our dependencies on that. We struggle with this a lot with React, in DNN and dependencies, because all the persona bar is built on React modules. So it becomes painfully hard to maintain sometimes and stay up to date, because this environment moves incredibly fast. So that's just kind of the precursor of what we're really kind of talking about here. I will preface this by saying I am using a template, a Visual Studio template that was created by Daniel Vladas, who's on here. And Daniel, if I screw up or say anything wrong, or want to provide some extra clarity, feel free to chime in. But his template is kind of our de facto standard now for creating custom modules in DNN. And out of the box, it supports Web API and Web Components based front end. Now you can use this template for other purposes as well. So like if you wanted to have a module that is Angular based or Vue.js based or React based, you could use this template. It's just got a little bit more work to do to swap out some of the Web Components front end for that. So I'll show you some of that in just a minute. But you can get it on the Visual Studio Marketplace here. It's arrowware_DNN_templates. It's out on GitHub as well. So you can follow along out there with what's going on. And yeah, he's got some nice documentation here to give you a little bit of a background. But I'll be using it. And the reason I kind of say this, because when you look at the code that I'll show in just a few minutes, it can be a little bit overwhelming, because what you get out of the box is a lot of stuff in there that you can use or not use. So we'll try to focus on the parts that I made changes to. But out of the box, when you install the template or create a project using the template in Visual Studio, it's going to wire up some basic functionality for you at the beginning. And I've got a site here that's loaded up and showing some of the basic out-of-the-box features of it. Let's see, let me get logged into this. I'll show you kind of how it operates. And it's not like crazy, beautiful UI kind of stuff just yet. It's just kind of the out-of-the-box way to implement a search, to add an item to a list, to have an item here and have some details about the item and an ability to edit or delete the items in the list. But that, that kind of covers a lot of use cases for modules, because you end up creating lists of things. You want a way to search those things, and you want a way to look at the detail of them. You want a way to add, edit, and delete them. So it just comes out of the box with that there, and you can replace those with your own components. So what I decided to do for this demo of using Web Components is I was thinking, wouldn't it be kind of cool to create an app that uses, we use Ionic a lot or Ionic framework, I should say, for creating mobile apps. And it's a fantastic framework for doing that. And the Ionic framework is really just a collection of web components. So I thought, well, why don't we blend the worlds? Why don't we use some Ionic web components inside of a DNN module? Excuse me. That'll teach me to take a bite to eat right before I start talking.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Take a breath. Take a drink.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm trying to rush through this so we don't keep everybody too late. So I thought, well, why don't I just convert this app here to a to-do app using Ionic? And I thought that would be kind of fun, and leverage some of the features that are already here, but just replace the web components that come out of the box with the template with Ionic components. So Ionic framework, I'm using, what I do is a lot of this is based on documentation right here. Now I'm using version 5 of Ionic because I was having a bit of trouble with some of the controllers that are in version 6 and the way they work. I just didn't have time because honestly I started building this just a couple of days ago in my free time to try to get ready for the presentation. But this is really all I'm following is going through the components. So you'll see in a minute where I used an ion fab, which is just now I'm losing my train of thought of what fab is, but it's an action button, something action button. Floating, that's what it is, floating, thank you. Floating action button here. So I just come out to the documentation, go to the ion fab and look and see how they use it within Stencil. Now, I know I'm talking about a lot of different things here, but Stencil is what the folks at Ionic created. It's really a tool to create web components. So this is what is being used inside of the template from Daniel, as well as to create your own web components. And it's really a tool to create those. It's called Stencil.js. And I should probably pull up that website here real quick. Stenciljs.com. Oops, nope, that is not right. Let's see. Got to spell it right. There we go, stenciljs.com. So they actually created this tool so that they could create the web components that they use for Ionic Framework version 4. So it's the very tool. But the thing is like there's so much we could talk about with just it, but that's what you'll see in action in just a minute. So back to here, I toggle over to the stencil whenever I'm looking at usage here because I want to use these components in Stencil. And I just look at the documentation and say, yep, that's what I want. So I just grab that, and paste it over in there. And as long as I've got my environment set up right in the project, it'll just work. So the other thing that I'm using is Ionicons, which is really just something kind of like Font Awesome for icons. It's a fairly small collection of icons that you can use within Ionic. And I just use that because when I pull in Ionic into the mobile, the module, then I automatically get Ionicons there. So I just decided to use that. So let's take a look at the app first, and then we'll kind of do a deep dive. This module is out on GitHub on my personal repo account, in my personal GitHub account on a repo called dnn.ionic-to-do. So you can take a look at that out there, and we can maintain it and move it a little bit forward and have a good working example of this if anybody's interested. So let's take a look and see how it works. So this is just a clean install of DNN 9. Whatever it is, 9.10.2, I believe. And I am logged out right now. And let's wake up the site. And you'll see very similar to what was here on the out of the box, search, add, and a list. Now I'm logged in on this site, but when you log out, notice that the ad is gone and the editing capabilities are gone. Well, the same thing is true for here, but the components look quite different, right? This is very Ionic-ish for that. And one of the cool things about Ionic, let me inspect this and change this into a mobile view. And let me refresh. Notice I have an iPhone 12 showing up here for this. Well, the look and feel just completely changed to match the design guide for Apple devices, for iOS devices. So that's one of the kind of cool benefits that you might get out of the box, with using Ionic. So when I check something, it takes the look and feel. But if I switch this over to an Android device and refresh, then the look and feel uses material design, and you get that kind of look and feel. So that just kind of happens automatically out of the box when you're using Ionic. So that's one of the neat things. So let me log in now. Oops, I should not have done it that way. I need to refresh. Okay, there we go. Now, and feel free to ask any questions as we go along here. I know I'm going kind of fast and throwing a lot of things at you. But as soon as I logged in, now I was talking about the Ion FAB, the floating action button. Well, that's the floating action button there that is replacing the add item that was over here. And I also have some editing capability. Now, I did something really silly just to kind of prove, I guess, that I'm using Ionic components here. That you wouldn't want to do this on a real website, but you know, if you're on a mobile device, it's common to have a swiping experience. So if I swipe to the left, you'll notice I've got some action buttons here. So I did it that way, just to show that I'm definitely using their web components and that it's working just as you would expect it to in a mobile app. It's working great within the context of a module. So what I would say is if you ever do use Ionic or something for a DNN module, make sure you're only using the pieces that really make sense for a web experience. Now, while that works, nobody's going to think to swipe that, right? So unless they're on a mobile device. So I wouldn't recommend something like that, but I just thought that would be kind of cool to show. So let's jump into the code. Oh, and the search experience works just fine. So if I start typing some text, it'll filter the to-dos by the text that I'm typing. So that's working just great. So let's look at the code just a little bit on this. Okay, so we'll kind of focus over here on the right-hand side, and I don't want to dig too deep into the module template, but I do at least want to give it a little bit of a high level overview of kind of the way that things are organized in here. Right out of the box, when you create a module using this template, you'll get a build project. You'll get some integration tests that are built into it. You'll get a module project, which is your back-end type stuff, so your web API code that's related to that. And you'll get a module.web project, which is your front end of the project. So when you're building web components and stuff, it's all front end. It's all HTML, JavaScript, so it's front end work. And then it talks to the web API in your back end project here. And then you'll get a project for your unit tests as well. So the focus of this is going to be, I didn't change anything anywhere in this except for a few little bug things that Daniel and I were kind of working on together on that. But I didn't change anything anywhere except for the module.web project. Okay. So that's all these files that you see here are the files that were here right out of the box. And I've just done a few changes to it to bring in Ionic and replace some of the components. So you'll have a source folder here. The front end, since it is a stencil app, essentially, that we're building here. So you can use Stencil to create individual web components, but you can also use Stencil to build web applications using a collection of web components or various web components. And it generates all the code that you need for utilizing it in the end. So let me pull up a little bit. So I've got one file open here. Now this is view.html. This is all that is being used in the end to pull in the application that is being built over in module.web. And notice that it has a my-component because that's the naming convention that's used in here right out of the box for the components. You'll see my component, and that's kind of the entry point. And there's some other components that are consumed and used by my component. But my component is the only thing that gets put in the DNN side of thing. Now notice this is, if you look at the path here, it is in my desktop modules, DNN. Oops. Now let me just show you in the Explorer over here. So if you go over to resources in the backend project, there's a view.html file right here in their views. And that's all it takes to actually render it. And notice there are two script tags. One is in support of ES modules, and the other one is kind of a fallback if you're in an environment does not, or a browser environment that does not support ES modules. And that's just a later, I'm going to botch this up explaining it, but it's where you don't have module support or some awareness of modules. So if you're in some platform that doesn't support that, or some browser that doesn't support ES modules, but Stencil takes care of that for you. It generates both of these JavaScript files, and that's all that needs to be included in there. So you may be asking, well, okay, but you style this stuff, right? You're styling it somehow, so where is the CSS that controls the styling of everything? Well, it's actually in the JavaScript. So there's a way to put CSS inside of the JavaScript, and that's kind of the way that works. So you don't have to have anything but these two includes here to deploy or use all of the web components that you make. So back over to the front end project, what we typically do is we'll use Visual Studio to edit the back end, you know, the C# stuff, but we'll use VS Code to just open the module.web folder. And that's what I'm looking at here. Let me close some of these down. So we're looking here at what we were seeing in Visual Studio right here in the module.web. So I'm literally in that folder, and I've opened up that folder in Visual Studio Code. And this is a whole front end project, so it's node based using Stencil. So you have a package JSON file that has the various dependencies that you're using. And you'll notice that everything is listed as a dev dependency here, because in the end, all you need are those two JavaScript files that get put out. So you really don't have any dependencies in your deployed app. I'm going to say that again because this is the part that makes this so powerful, is that you don't have to deploy any dependencies. So if you're using a standards-based approach of using web components, you're just dealing with build tools here in generating the output, which is the JavaScript. So you don't have to understand all this stuff right now, but that is the benefit, is that you just end up with a pure HTML custom element and two JavaScript file references, and you're done. So how do you maintain that? Well, you just maintain your web components, you know. So it's really great in that regard. Let's see, how am I doing on time? Okay, so I'm a little bit over already, so I'll just do a whirlwind tour here real quick. In order to use Ionic, I needed to pull in Ionic Core, which is an NPM package. So I did that, and I am using version 5.9.3 here because I had some problems with version 6 with using controllers, because one of the things that I do in the front end is when you click this, it has a modal that pops up or an alert controller that pops up. Well, that requires controller code, and it doesn't just work out of the box. So I had some problems with Ionic 6 on that. Okay, so I pulled that in, and then I did some magic to wire up. I created a global folder here that wasn't a part of the module template that got built out. And you've got this main TS here that pulls TypeScript file that pulls in some of the things that are already built in. But I wanted another one that was going to be a little bit more specific to Ionic Core, because I didn't want to, in every single component, I didn't want to have to re-import Ionic Core every single time. So I wanted to do it kind of in a global fashion. So I created a TypeScript file that imports Ionic Core globally. And then I also have some imports set up for things that I need from Ionic from a CSS perspective. and that pulls in all of that CSS so that I can leverage all of the Ionic frameworks CSS within the app, theming type stuff and stuff like that, colors and fonts and things like that.
I have a little comment about this.
Yeah.
So even though you import Ionic Core, the whole package, the only thing that's going to get bundled is the things that you're calling. So there's a concept of tree shaking. So those JavaScript files end up being super small.
That's right. That's a good point, Daniel. Within the individual components, I will actually use various things. So I'll show one place, I believe in the create here. At the very top of the file, you'll see a import alert controller from Ionic Core, because I needed that controller specifically to be imported in this component. So I pulled that in. So, yep. And the way that kind of gets wired in for those that are interested in this is, you may say, well, how did it know to load this stuff? Well, there is a stencil config TypeScript file here in the root, which is part of it. I added these 2 lines, which are supported with stencil. Oops, 2 lines. I highlighted 3, but yet there we go. So global script, I am referencing that app.ts file that I created, and global style, I am referencing that Sass file that I referenced. And stencil you can use Sass and stencil for CSS compilation or Sass compilation on that, and it's using the Sass plugin here. And all of this was really already set up for me, except for these 2 lines here. So that's the only thing I really changed on this. So then we get into the individual components, and I'll just really quickly burn through this. But the entry point is my component, and you could rename these and call these, anything you want to for that, as long as they meet the kind of naming standards that are required for web components. But for each component, you're going to have a TSX file, which is a TypeScript-based JSX file. If any of you have had any experience with React uses JSX. So Stencil uses a reactive base system. It's not React, so you're not pulling in React. Don't go get concerned there. But that is what that is. And you can have a CSS file or a Sass in this case, since we're using the Sass compilation that goes along with it. And that's really all that you have to have for a component to operate. And your Sass could be completely empty as well. So you really just need a TSX file, and that's it. The README file gets auto-generated by Stencil. So there's a lot of things that are baked into Stencil that just does things for you, and you don't have to worry about it. So it's well documented. Didn't write a word of this. It reads whatever I do in my component, and it creates the documentation accordingly. So everything I did, notice it changed some things here that my Ion FAB, my FAB button that I put in my icon and ripple effect, it just pulled all that stuff in because it just knew how to read it and create the documentation. So if you were to look at that in a Markdown preview, let me see. Very nicely formatted documentation, as you can see over here on the right, of how to use this component. So if I wanted to use just this component by itself, then this is the way I can do it. Okay, so we've got, oops. So right here, a lot of this is what was here to start with. About the only thing that I changed was I swapped out the input control that was being used for the search. I actually swapped it out for an Ion search bar, and I wrapped that search bar, that component, with an Ion toolbar, and I wrapped the Ion toolbar with an Ion header. And you can see I didn't really go through much work here. I reused some of the code that Daniel has in the template for his search bar right in here. I just had to figure out a couple little things, like how to get to the value for this particular component. But we're dealing in TypeScript here, so you have nice IntelliSense when you're typing things. And all that just kind of worked when I swapped those out. And then my create is another component. So within this component, I'm referencing another component for my little add fab, that I put in there. So under the my create, notice we're just using HTML marker up here. This is in the render. I'd be happy to deep dive, with anybody that's interested in this, and I'm sure Daniel probably would too, because this is really fun stuff once you get used to it. But under my create, we go down to the render section here, and you can see where I left in what was in the template. That's just a comment. And there was a button. So there was a button for the add before. I swapped it out for an ion fab. So there's my ion fab, and I had to just kind of wire it up. And that's where I'm using an ionic icon, Ionicon, to put inside of the fab button. So the little plus sign that's how you reference that. So it just illustrates that any web component could be used pretty much anywhere. You just have to kind of figure out how it works within that context and then put it in. So the hard part was just wiring up Ionic and pulling in Ionic to the project and making controllers work. But other than that, all of the pure UI components like Ion Fab and stuff like that, it just worked when I put it in there. So it just only took a little bit of HTML, and I'm done. So it's really fun. So there's a lot to this that you could get overwhelmed with pretty quickly, and I don't want you to get too bogged down with all that kind of stuff. But it's just an example of how you can use pure web components in this case from another set of web components altogether that's intended a little bit more for mobile. You can use it right into a DNN module. Any questions, or did I royally confuse everyone?
No, I'll chime in to say that it makes sense. We did a splash of an introduction of this. Gosh, was it the beginning of 2021? It's a while back, but you gave us a flavor of this. And I think maybe at the time, everything modern was supporting, but some of the other ones didn't have everything supporting. And now that it is there, seems like it's the type of thing we should all start learning to use, and maybe rely on some other frameworks a little less, and rely on what's built into the browsers a little more.
Yeah, Daniel, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you've been building a ton of these modules you're not in the beginning of this anymore. I mean, you've been doing it for several years now.
Yeah.
So in your experience, is this really wise to go down this path rather than just, doing things the way we used to, with web?
Absolutely. Because what's really, really cool is that you have one thing, right? The component that encapsulates the look and feel, it encapsulates the behavior, it can fire up events. It's really just like a real HTML element, right? You have a button, the button fires up events. Whatever you put in the button is any HTML. So the same thing happens with web components. You can have slots and make it very flexible by just putting whatever HTML you want inside of the component, kind of a wrapper like a button is. As for support, the only browser that's a little bit edge case is Internet Explorer 11 and under. But on 11, even on 11, I mean, I don't see any good reason why anybody would have under 11. In the enterprise, I know that IE 11 is still like the only option, apparently for security reasons, which is a bad reason, but it's still supported. But the two bundles that you have with ES modules and without ES modules, what's cool with Stencil is that it's going to detect what browser you're on, and it's going to load what it needs to work on that browser. One thing that doesn't have polyfills is to have CSS variables declared on elements. So if you want to customize those components, one thing with the shadow DOM is it's like a little HTML iframe if we want. It's not, but it's isolated from the rest. So your external CSS, if you're using channel DOM, will not leak inside of your component. So in order to customize the component, you have to declare CSS variables and then consume them like we see on line 7.8 that you had, or yeah, see line 7.8. So this var dash dash something, that's a CSS variable. So if I want to change how my component looks, I just have to declare that variable in any parent of this element, and it's going to use that value. Well, on IE11, the only thing that doesn't have polyfill, if you want to override it, you have to do it on the root level. As in any other browser, it's any parent. But other than that, everything works perfect, and Stencil handles loading the polyfills needed if your browser doesn't support inherently those features.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you do have
Hey,
the
David.
capability. Yep. Mhm.
I just had a quick question. Could you highlight somewhere that shows an example of how it gets data from the back end?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just look at the list here. This is the load for this. So, and let me just find my way through this where it is. Okay. So the item client here is something that is imported from the services in the project. So if I flip back over to my Visual Studio, go to services, well, it was in here, I'm sorry. Services and services there. So this will be, let's see, item client is right here. And he did this in a generic kind of fashion, so you could rename these that makes sense for your world.
I can speak a little bit about this though.
Mm-hmm.
So within this template, it's actually auto-generated for you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go in the C# part of that, on the controllers, it's going to be in the controllers folder and item controller. So if you scroll to one of the endpoints, get items page, let's say, with whatever. So you see the decorators above these methods, they have a Swagger response decorator. And Swagger is basically used to document APIs, but it also has features to auto-generate your TypeScript client. So within this template, it's not specific to web components, but within this template, as long as you declare what you're returning if it's an OK, and what you're returning if you get an internal server error, you declare the different things that it could return. Well, when you run a build, it's going to generate that service TS class automatically with strong typings, with comments and everything, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
This
So you're
right
not
here
returning everything as an object?
Yes.
Exactly.
This thing is auto-generated, all of this. So
Yeah.
we don't have to write the services. You could roll your own, but if
Yep.
you can wrap your head around the way that this is being generated, it just handles it for you, including your models and everything.
Yeah, and it's really, really cool if you go on where it's getting called. You have strong typings. So let's say between 87 and 88 there, like you put a new line and you do items dot.
Oh,
oops. Sorry, results dot items dot. I'm sorry. So result dot, well, you get typings here. And if you do items that, well, let's say item square bracket 0, let's say we access the first item in the array, and then you do a dot, you're going to have the properties of that object and the code comments that you had in your C#. So they port over as TS comments, JS doc.
so each item in that list has a name, well, an ID, a name, and a description.
Yeah.
And I'm displaying the name on there. So down here in my template, let's see, right, here's my item. I'm actually putting item.name right there.
Oh.
And that's all it really took. So this is really the only thing you end up having to write. So, you're in TypeScript world here, so you do have to kind of have that awareness and everything of how that works. But this is more complicated to look at, but a simple, in the end, it's just doing a simple fetch, you know, against that web API.
Yep.
That's handled in the back end. Did that answer your question there, Jeremy?
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, I debated on whether or not to use the template on this, but I would love for more people to wrap their head around this template and start using it, because I just think it's fantastic what Daniel's created here. So it's a little bit overwhelming when doing a quick demo like this to not get buried in all the details of some of this stuff, which literally is magic, right? You know, it's or auto-generated stuff. Feels like, oh my gosh, I got to learn all that stuff. Well, no, you really don't have to learn all that stuff. It's so much of it's done for you, and you can just really focus on the front end work that you need to do.
I like magic when I can tell it saves me from 200 or more lines of code and agony.
Yeah, because there's a lot of duplication when you're in this kind of module template where you have a web API and a JavaScript front end. You have to duplicate everything because you have the client server part and you need to have the same kind of objects and stuff. So this handles that surface friction automatically, and then you just go on with your day and you have your typings generated for you.
So I'll show this real quick and then I'll kind of wrap up here. But I created a couple of methods for, you know, I showed you the sliding options there for editing and deleting. I didn't wire them up to actually do the deletion and the editing, but I wanted to just console log out, you know, something to show you that I've clicked those buttons. So just kind of shows you how to wire things in with this. And it works similarly with other web components as well. This is not Ionic specific, but if I pull up, my monitors went on the fritz just a few seconds ago, so now I've got to rearrange everything again, bring it back over. So I'll go into inspect on this, and I'll go out of mobile view, and let's just refresh, make sure. Okay, so if I take one of these items here and just swipe it to the left and I click edit, let's watch the console down here, and you'll see that that event got fired up and edit's clicked, and that is the actual event that came from that and all the information that you have access to for that particular element, which is a lot. It's all the information that you kind of get from it. Same thing happens when I click delete, but it's delete clicked. So, you know,
Chrome's amazing. Now, if you click down far enough, you'll see what you had for lunch in those lists too.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. And you know, if you've used Firefox Developer Edition, it's even more powerful in this area. But I have had a hard time using it. Transition.
And this is like really a pointer event, but you can also have custom events that are simpler and just provide the ID of the item that you clicked or something. That's also something Stencil will help you do properly.
Exactly. Any questions? I apologize for having to go through it so quickly, but happy to answer questions offline or give it a little bit deeper dive into specific areas offline if anybody's interested.
All right, I got to jump out, but nice job. I really appreciate this. This is very exciting. Thanks, David.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I'll go ahead and end the recorded portion of this meetup. Thanks for everybody for joining us. I think our next meetup is in February, and it will be on the 17th of February.
That is right.
Do we have anybody on board for that yet, Ryan? I'm sorry, I didn't even look beforehand.
Yeah, I don't believe we do yet. And that might be a good point to mention to everybody who's on and everyone who's watching this after the fact that in the last year, David Poindexter has done a fantastic job curating our content and really chasing after topical speakers and people to come and present exciting, interesting ideas and things with us. And we had a great year last year. Some of the more watched and attended meetings that we've had in a while. We've also shaken up that format and time of day between being able to have this during for us in the eastern part of the United States, daytime meetings versus nighttime meetings to help some of the folks across the pond to be able to join us. So all that comes around to say again, if you are interested in speaking or have topic ideas that you want to have us chase down, reach out to Southern Fried DNN user group, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, I will say that we've got some new people bubbling up here, and some real OGs here as well. Like Chris Hammond is going to be speaking. I think Eileen Martin is going to step out on the edge there and present something in March. So this could be you for February or any future one. Please just let us know. So February the 17th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern is the next one, and look forward to seeing everybody there.